Welcome to the world of modern Russian literature. My name is Natalya Lomykina. I'm literary critic and literary observer of Forbes Russia. Today I want to discuss why women write and present you new voices of Russian prose. Marina Stepnova, Guzel Yakhina, Yulia Yakovleva, Alla Gorbunova, Vera Bogdanova and Oksana Vasyakina. Over the last 10 years, the literary landscape of Russian prose has changed significantly. Major award shortlists, a list of the most awaited books of the year, they are all packed with female names. The last time we saw such a surge in the middle of the 20th century in the poetry, when only women turned out to be able to express that hard emotional experience of the Second World War. What male writers tried to comprehend rationally and express in large forms, large novels, and much later, when the war ended, women depicted with the help of emotional, imaginary, right away, poetically. It's interesting that now, in the era of digital transformation, when the world at first was becoming borderless, especially with the help of the internet or having no borders, and then got divided into cells because of the pandemic, we see again the same picture. It's the women who are writing about the humanity, about what is happening now, about all the changes that are happening in the world right at the moment. While male writers are turning to the large forms, to the large historical novel, and attempt to find the answers in the past, carefully studying it and deconstructing it, the women reflect, ponder, and express the changes happening at the moment. With their typical sensitivity, intuition, empathy, they react on what's going on and reflect it. Female writers choose different forms, including the classical fiction novel that Russian literature is world famous for. But the way they work in it is completely new. And we will try to demonstrate the variety of genres that exist now in Russian literature today, and to show you how differently they are used by talented Russian female writers. Marina Stepnova, in her novel The Garden, writes about the second half of the 19th century. The action takes place in the country estate belonging to the Buryatinsky princes. And this is, of course, the homage to all classical Russian literature, from Tolstoy to Chekhov. On one hand, The Garden is a big intellectual game, like Antonia Bayet does, with allusions that are so obvious here and less obvious there. For example, the first chapter of The Garden begins with the exclamation, "What a lovely Natasha!" And of course, the reader easily recognizes Natasha Rostova from Leo Tolstoy's world-famous novel, which Princess Buryatinskaya reads in the novel in her living room. The Garden's main character is named Natasha. Her home name is Tusia, and she will eventually turn her parents' life upside down. The Princess Buryatinskaya gives birth to her baby very late, especially for those times, at the age of 44. And the author, Marina Stepnova, takes the classical form of the 19th century prose and writes it in absolutely modern novel about upbringing children, about feminism and freedom, about today's life. Princess Natalia Buryatinskaya, Tusia, is an unwanted baby, born firstly and largely thanks to Dr. Maisel's efforts. And Dr. Maisel falls in love with that girl like he was her own father, and she was his daughter. He surrounds Tusia with complete freedom, with love and freedom of today's life. Marina Stepnova says, but imagine what it is like to be a woman of the 21st century in the world of the 19th century that belongs to a man. You are smart, rich, well-born, and you can't do anything. And not even because you don't follow the rules of the game, but because you're not even allowed to play it. The author, Marina Stepnova, says that she tried to put the modern parenting model into the 19th century world, when childhood was completely different, especially the girl's childhood. And the novel about women's freedom very quickly became a novel about upbringing, the upbringing of both the parent and the child. The Garden is a novel in 5 parts, so gripping that it's impossible to tear yourself away from the story. The reader gets drawn in by anything that Marina Stepnova describes, from the princess' evening walk in a blossoming garden to the experience of young students in Simbirsk, to the cholera riot in St. Petersburg. And all the storylines rhythm and form a complex pattern. The Garden is a great story of strong, spirited, free woman living in harsh social conditions, beautifully presented in stylistic tradition of the 19th century Russian literature. In the hands of talented writer, the epic historical novel genre, typically based on true fact, can become the basis of an excellent work of fiction. For example, Hilary Mantel brilliantly does it, and she wins 2 Booker Prizes with her novels about Thomas Cromwell. The history from the capital letter H is always just a backdrop for the story. It's a backdrop for the story of individual living of the one person inside this picture. And that's how works the most successful debutant of Russian literature in recent years, Guzel Yakhina. English-speaking readers probably already know her for her outstanding debut Zuleika, translated by Lisa Hayden. That was the story based on Guzel Yakhina's grandmother's story of her memoir about years in Gulag. Guzel Yakhina is a winner of all major literary awards in Russia, and Zuleika has been translated already to 21 or 22 languages. In her new book, Echelon to Samarkand, Guzel Yakhina writes about the great famine of the early 1920s. The echelon from the title carries 500 hungry street children to evacuation, from hunger-stricken Kazan to a warm Samarkand where there is bread. And the echelon is commanded by a young Red Army soldier, Dave, who fought in the Civil War, and he's not afraid of bullets, but he's lost when he sees weak and helpless children. And a principled, tough woman with the last name Bela, that means white, an experienced children commissar, like man in skirt, and she knows for sure that you can save the children and get them to their destination alive only if you strictly follow the rules. And this is how she shows her love for the children, by saving them, not to feeling sorry for them. Yakhina bluntly describes the historical realities. The children's train sets off to the journey practically without food, without clothes, without shoes, with minimum supply of fuel. And Dave and Bela will have to try hard to get the children to their destination alive. Yakhina writes an excellent, dynamic, very cinematic, adventurous Eastern, show the terrible power of hunger and the essence of human nature, of course, where in addition to animal instincts, there is good and evil, there is humanism, and there is morality. And everyone who meets the echelon on the way, whether it to be Chekists or white Cossacks or Basmachis, everybody help the children in this way or another. And the attitude towards hunger, dying children, is the prism through which we see those who fight in the civil war. Yakhina doesn't mythologize even the reds or the whites. She doesn't judge them. Atrocities were committed by both, but each side had its own truth. They had heart and they had soul, and for these adults, the children trapped in this historical meat-grinder became a bright symbol of justice and the hope of salvation. In Yakhina's first book, it was her grandmother who was the prototype of Zuleika. Beyond the echelon to Samarkand, there is the story of her granddad, who was sent to an orphanage, then evacuated on a train, similar like that one in the novel. History is an amalgamation of individual fates, and Yakhina has a talent to zoom in on such fates. Russian historical past can become an interesting background for other genres as well. Yulia Yakovleva became famous for her series about Leningrad, Leningrad Tales, for teenagers and their parents. Here, the realities of 1930s, political repressions, the atmosphere of fear during the years of Stalin's terror are conveyed metaphorically. 3 children are left alone in a grey city after their parents were taken by a crow. The novel The Crow's Children has been translated to English and already published by Penguin Book. Leningrad Tales is of course a story of what freedom is worth and what happens to people when they live under authoritarian regime. And Yakovleva continues that topic in the series of detective stories. It's retro detective stories about Vasily Zaitsev, who is an investigator in 1930s in Leningrad. The writer herself defines her story as criminal retro. Yulia Yakovleva transports a classic detective story to 1930s Leningrad and fills it with signs of times. It's hard to say which of two storylines, the investigation or the atmosphere historical backdrop, makes the book the real page-turner, but still they both work. And the main character, Vasily Zaitsev, works at a terrible time when the connection between punishment and guilt has completely disintegrated. Everything is saturated with sticky fear, and one can be sure of nothing. And Yulia Yakovleva is brilliantly able to work with historical material within the framework of chosen genre. In her books, Leningrad is not just a cardboard decoration, but it's a living organism that creates the novel's living space. And in her first book, A Hunting We Will Go, the murder is connected to the famous paintings of the Hermitage. In the second novel, The Taming of the Red Horse, Vasily Zaitsev takes on the case of the death of some horses with which the best Stalin specialists work. The third book, In the Sky with Diamonds, follows the filming of the first Soviet comedy, and the actress is killed in Leningrad. I should say that Yulia Yakovleva is good not only in criminal retro, she is also brilliant in modern detective story, in modern style and content. For example, she has a political detective, Cannibals, about the murder in the Bolshoi Theater, and she shows the mores of the modern political elite here. At the beginning of this talk, I said that modern female Russian writers react to what's happening in new, sharp and accurate way. And I think there is a reason for that. The younger generation of fiction writers doesn't even seem to need historical backdrop or genres. The artistic expression is vivid. And I want to tell you about Alla Горбунова, Vera Bogdanova, Natalia Lomykina, Evgenia Nekrasova, Oksana Vasyakina, because they are representatives of different kind of writers. Perhaps it depends on the fact that they all were poets first, and then they had to do something with their poetical language, and they came to prose with this poetical background. After all, it's a different view of the world, a different style of writing, a different way of transmitting meaning. And today's young writers are bold, fresh and exposed. Let's speak about Alla Горбунова, laureate of the Norse Award, New Literary Prize. And she's a pleasant surprise of a writer. She writes as if literary tradition simply doesn't exist. At the same time, her collection, The End of the World, My Love, is so deeply rooted into Russian culture that her texts are recognized and accepted instantly. You just know what she means. It's like you are in a foreign country and someone begins to read you a poem you don't know, but in your native language. You just understand what's going on. Горбунова is famous as a poet. Her poems have been translated into 11 languages, and at the age of 20 she won the debut prize for the poetry. But now she writes fiction, and her prose book, End of the World, My Love, starts like an honest memoir, autobiographical fiction about being young in the 90s. It's summer residence in Karelia, teenage rebellion, first love, bad company, a reliable, cozy family. It's family world. But by the second part of the book, this world begins to tremble and dissipate. The narrator, so reliable at first, splits in two. The heroine gets an alter ego named Nastya, and that cozy world of youth, clear and understandable world, turns inside out, revealing a dark, mystical underside, when there is a place for violence and horror and phantasmagoria and dark romanticism, similar to the man of, Christian Rupinian. Alla Gorbunova sends the reader on a risky, lonely journey through the depths of her own unconsciousness. She writes quite a symbolist tales with lookalikes and fairy prostitutes and Death the Beautiful walking in the Russian forest. So the middle of the book is self-destruction, psychological and physical, and it's someone running from himself. However, at the end of the book, Alla Gorbunova stops all that phantasmagoria as an experienced director with one wave. And the story, Memories of Paradise, brings us back to the fragile world of the youth, to the fragile beginning of the youth, where the 8-year-old heroine reads the Count of Monte Cristo in her grandfather's garden, and all the mental torments, all bad companies and rash decisions, all that psychological and physical crash, and with its difficult consequences, are still just a projection of her imagination. It could be and could not be. Poetic vision is also helping another writer, Vera Bogdanova, to foresee the probable future based on newspapers' headlines, technological progress and economical issues. The novel Pavel Jan and Other River Beasts is set in 2049. Mars still hasn't been colonized, nor has the Fountain of Youth been found, but Russia survived in severe economic crisis and became extremely dependent on China. And Vera Bogdanova builds her fiction world around this prediction. In China, meanwhile, chips are implanted into the entire population so that a person's health and his bank access can be monitored. And it's clear that something similar will happen in Russia. And the main character of the novel, the programmer Pavel, will have to engineer the Russian version of this chip. For him, it's the way to leave Russia for China, for Benjin, the city of his dreams, where his lost father comes from. But this is also the time when Pavel accidentally runs into a man from his past, a guy who raped him in the orphanage and got away with it. So the two forces, dream and revenge, become the driving forces of the plot. But the transfer of action to the near future allows the writer to raise all the problems, all the relevant topics of today, from the workaholism as a norm to growing internet addiction and lack of privacy and corruption and violence against children and so on. But more importantly, this temporary distance allows Vera Bogdanova a more detached look at the hero of our times. Pavel Jan, a half-bred who raised himself after the death of his parents, is torn between feelings and career choices. Pavel is an intelligent man, beaten down many times by hardship, but not broken and not in pain. And he has pulled himself, from the bottom by his hair, and he doesn't want to return to that bottom. So Vera Bogdanova wrote a very modern, balanced, well-built novel about the difficult path to the dream, and moreover, about what awaits the person at the end of this particular road. Modern young writers are at ease in linguistic space. Poetic vision, responsiveness, attention to the inner world, and the utmost frankness that makes an individual experience reliable. And this has not been previously seen in Russian women prose. Cognitive autofiction has become a breath of fresh air. Stories written by arrhythmia screenwriter Natalya Lomykina, Ode to Joy by critic Valeria Pustovaya, are comprehended by the authors and reworked as narratives. The ability to collect, to gather together the details, as Rebecca Solnit used to say, recollection of my non-existence, is a new and important quality of new Russian prose. The much-discussed novel Wound by Oksana Vasyakina, where the young poet transports the remains of her mother, who has died of cancer, from Volgograd to Siberia in order to bury her with grandmother and aunt, is a classical autofiction. The autofiction with its freestyle, loose feelings, alternation of plot and reflections. This all is the right method of speaking frankly about the memory, about the essence of life, about one's own sexuality, about the essence of woman and her place in today's world. It seems to me that this is the new segment of new Russian prose that is very interesting today. And this vision is interested for readers. This is supported by the fact that Marina Stepanova's poetic essay book, In Memory of Memory, was the shortlisted of the International Booker Prize in 2021. So, answering the question that has become the topic of this discussion today, why do women write? I will say that they write because they have their own recognizable voice, because they can't keep silence anymore, and they understand what topics they care about. They feel that literature is the right space for the powerful statement. Thank you very much for your attention.